Great lawyers don't always know how to build great law firms. Let's change that. Join Ben Gideon as he shares hard-won lessons from building his own financially successful law firm and practical insights from top law firm entrepreneurs, business consultants, and more. This is a podcast for lawyers, by lawyers. Welcome to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. Produced and powered by Law Pods.
Welcome to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. I am Jeff Wright, Chief Operating Officer at Gideon Asen, and as always, joined by Ben Gideon, owner, manager, partner, podcast extraordinaire. How are you today, Ben?
You know, very busy trying to organize my life so I can go on vacation. Vacation, as always, comes at an inopportune time.
Yes.
But I'm optimistic I can wrap things up and get out the door. So excited for that.
I think you can. It's been a busy time, but well-deserved vacation. I mean, you haven't had a vacation in 2 or 3 weeks, I think. So
it's been at least a week or two.
You must be exhausted. Well, let's first get into our sponsors. Our podcast is brought to you by 1% for the Planet. 1% for the Planet is a global environmental nonprofit. It's been around for over 20 years. It's pretty simple. Businesses donate 1% of their annual sales, and they distribute to pre-vetted environmental causes. It's very easy to do. We've been involved with them for years, and we're thrilled with their partnership. And if anyone does sign up for 1% for the Planet, please reach out to Ben or I, and we will be sure to give you a shout out on the podcast.
Great. Our podcast is also brought to you by Supio. Supio is an AI platform designed for trial lawyers, widely used by many of my colleagues. People love it. It's highly versatile. They continue to make significant upgrades and improvements to it. It's a well-funded, very well-run company, so you know that they're going to continue to provide that kind of support. So we suggest checking them out at supio.com.
And finally, last but certainly not least, very near and dear to my heart, Vision Spark. Vision Spark is an executive key member search firm. So if you're looking for a chief operating officer, a CFO, HR, CIO, there's no better investment in your firm than finding the right people. The reason why they're near and dear to my heart, they found me for this job, and I tell Ben every day, best job I ever had.
Which just speaks to how bad all your other jobs must have been. But
no, give yourself some credit.
Yeah, we have a good time.
We do. So today's topic, attorney compensation. So I think a very important topic, and our firm, I believe, Ben, does it a little bit differently than the traditional plaintiff firms out there. And, you know, we want to talk about it and give you some ideas on what we do to attract the type of employees that we want and how it's working for us.
It's a really important topic. We had mentioned it during a prior podcast episode where we said we would get to it, and we actually heard from a frustrated listener who is a regular listener of the show and said, "Hey, you guys said you were going to cover attorney compensation. Where's that episode? We haven't heard it yet." So we wanted to make sure we circled back and covered that. What I wanted to do is just start by kind of giving kind of a big picture overview of it, and then we'll get into the very specifics of how our particular compensation structure works. But it really has to be guided by mission and principles in terms of what is it you're trying to achieve, who are you trying to attract and retain with your compensation model. I once happened to be in Orlando, Florida, and I had lunch with an attorney down there named John Morgan, who many may know. He's on advertisements and billboards all over the country. He runs Morgan & Morgan, which is the largest personal injury law firm in America. We are talking a lot about attracting and retaining lawyers. I think at one point, John owned 100% of his company himself, or maybe with his brother who runs his sort of back office functions. And then gradually, I think they have brought other people in sort of as equity participants over the years. I can't speak in great detail to the Morgan & Morgan model, but one thing he told me was everybody needs two things. They need love and they need money. I think it's important to keep that in mind. They're both critically important. Either one alone is not enough to attract and retain the best talent. The love part comes into feeling valued, feeling important, being able to do important work, satisfying work, having a team around you that allows you to reach your highest potential, that supports you. I mean, as Jeff and I were just joking around, also allows you to enjoy your work because we only live once and we all spend most of our, adult lives working. And if you don't find joy or satisfaction in that, no amount of money can really make up for that. So the love part is a topic for a different podcast or maybe a whole nother podcast franchise where I'll talk to you about my strategies for love, intimacy, and relationships. That will not be a well subscribed to show. There's not a particular authority on it. But I do think at our firm, we accomplish that goal pretty well by making everybody, feel appreciated and valued, and hoping to build out structures and systems that allows people to achieve their highest and best use. So they're not mired in bullshit, but able to do the things that bring them, satisfaction and joy. And for lawyers, a lot of that depends on having access to the kind of work they want to do. One thing Morgan & Morgan can offer top lawyers is we have really good cases, and they can get the cases because they do the marketing. So many lawyers are motivated to want to work on really good, high quality cases. Our firm is very fortunate in having many of those types of cases. The other part of that is particularly for a plaintiff contingent fee firm, but probably true for every firm, the quality of the work you have does translate quite directly to the compensation, because if your overall business model is not economically successful, you don't generate the kind of cash and revenue you need to pay people. It's pretty simple, right? If you have really good work, a good steady pipeline of work, if a lawyer is comparing the opportunities at your firm versus a different firm that doesn't have opportunities to the same quality work, even if the compensation structure might be more advantageous at a competitor firm, but they don't have the work, overall, they may be doing much better at a firm where maybe they're getting a slightly smaller percentage, but it's a smaller percentage of a much bigger pie. So all of that kind of plays into it. So that kind of goes to the love side. Let's talk about money, because at the end of the day, people need money. People deserve to be well paid for their time to reflect their real, value added to a business. And it quickly becomes apparent if a business is not willing to pay people what they're really worth. I think there was a book we referenced earlier in our show called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he made the point that they've done research on executive compensation and really found no good evidence that the generosity of the executive compensation plan translates to better people or better companies, which I thought was very interesting. And part of that is if you are hiring the kind of people that require money to motivate, you're hiring the wrong kind of people to begin with, because what you want are people that are motivated by the mission and by the work. Obviously, they also need to be paid and appropriately compensated. But after that, whatever that threshold of appropriate compensation is, adding incremental compensation to that in the study Jim Collins references in his book did not produce better companies or better people. So I'm going to just stop there first with that whole overview. Jeff, thoughts from your extensive experience on just kind of those big picture items?
Yeah, I love that you hit on the culture and the love piece, because at the end of the day, people can be compensated, overcompensated for the job, but if the job is a place that they do not want to be at, that's only going to last so long, and it's not going to translate into the type of production or the type of employee that you want. The compensation is always tricky because, I found there's a finite amount of really good attorneys out there that, we want to have as part of the team. And we have a very well defined hiring process that we've spoken about in the past. And I think one thing, I don't want to say that handicaps us, but, and you can probably speak to this, Ben, when you and Taylor started the firm, you made a conscious decision to not have a path to equity partnership, which I think traditionally, I mean, me being a non-attorney, my mindset is traditionally somebody starts at a firm, they're an associate, maybe they are a senior associate in 4 or 5 years, and then they have an opportunity for equity partnership, they can buy in, and that's kind of the traditional path that you and Taylor chose to not go that route. And we had to structure our salaries and our bonus plan to probably compensate for that to a certain extent, because there's no path for that. So I guess, what was your mindset with Taylor structuring it that way?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned at the outset that you have to start with what is your overarching goal and your mission in terms of developing a compensation plan, because you could have a traditional firm model where there's a pathway to equity partnership, and at some point when you make partner, you have an ownership interest and an equity interest in the profits of the firm. That brings with it series of considerations and issues that are unique to that model. I experienced that was the model I came from in my prior firm. And what I found, there's a lot of benefits to that model, which is that that's an easy way to attract and retain top talent, because there's obviously that carrot that you can offer that at the end of that arduous path, up the steep mountain, when you get to the peak, you now have that professional, accolade and accomplishment, and you have that equity that so many people appreciate and would like to enjoy someday. The downside to that model is that as you start to make more equity partners in an organization, the ownership gets quite diffuse, and it then becomes, there can be a complacency that sets in. There's an economic principle. I'm forgetting the name of it. You learn it in, microeconomics. I think it's agency cost maybe is the concept. But the idea is that if you have nobody who has a predominant ownership interest in something and everybody only has a small piece, nobody is highly motivated to go that extra mile, make that extra sacrifice to make the firm work. For instance, if you are 10% or 20% owner and your partners are enjoying their weekends at home with their families, why would you be burning the midnight oil sitting in the office? Why would you be working nights and weekends? Why would you be taking on additional stress and anxiety because you only enjoy 10 or 20% of that? You're giving away 80%. That's why somebody like, at Morgan & Morgan, you got a guy like John Morgan, who's kind of a force of nature, who I'm sure has worked 80-hour weeks for, 40 years, but he enjoys the vast majority of the fruits of that labor himself. So he's motivated to do that. And in my old firm, that's what I noticed, that there were some of us, and I'm just built this way, that generally work hard and always take on sacrifice, go above and beyond. And some people who just didn't want to do that. And that kind of equity, you could have more or less equity, but ultimately there is that agency cost problem of, since nobody owns it, nobody is as motivated to kill themselves to make the business successful. So I noticed that issue of sort of a institutional complacency. And there's also, from a management side, the ability to make fast, nimble decisions depends on having a streamlined process for that, not management by committee. And you can become paralyzed from inaction if you have too many people at the table, all who have a voice. And if someone's an equity owner in a business, it's hard not to give them a voice, at least in major decisions like that. So you're right. When Taylor and I started this firm, and I think it was more important to me than to Taylor because he had only been at that firm a few years and had actually not been a partner there. He was an associate when he left to start this firm. So he didn't quite have the same experience. But having been in a place where I felt like I was kind of killing myself to build the institution and to make it successful and work, and saw some of my colleagues who I really liked, but just didn't have that same goal, I didn't want to be back in an environment where I was giving away my equity ever again. So one of our fundamental principles in starting this firm was, as long as I'm here and alive and working, I don't intend to give away any of my equity. So I think that's been a very good decision and it's worked out well. But then that creates that problem you identified of, okay, if you're not willing to give people equity, what can you give them to attract and retain the very best talent and most talented lawyers? So I'll stop there for your comments, and then we can get into the details of how we address that problem.
Yeah, and I think a lot of hiring and compensation, well, the compensation, most people are thinking on the hiring side, what do I have to offer, whether it's benefits or salary or bonuses to get this individual on board? But you've mentioned the word retention a lot, and I think that gets lost in the shuffle. I mean, getting someone on board is great, and it's a challenge, and you want to make sure you make the correct hiring decision, but the retention is probably the most important part of that. How do you keep that individual that you worked really hard to get, and you can't put a price on the hundreds of hours of training and onboarding and integrating them? How do you retain that employee for ideally as long as you want to have them as part of the firm? And it not only comes back to the culture, but it does come back to the compensation. And if they can't get an equity partner, what are you offering them? And how can their compensation be tied to their performance and the firm's performance appropriately to ensure that the money part of their concerns is addressed appropriately? And I think the way you and Taylor have structured it here, I mean, our last iteration of the attorney bonus plan had to have had 25 or 30 versions before it was rolled out. And we met for, I don't know how many meetings we had on it before we rolled it out. A lot.
Yeah, and that's because the last iteration of what we tried to do was very ham-handed and poorly executed, and we didn't want to have that problem repeat itself. So we were much more deliberate and much more thoughtful this time to try to get it right. But just back to your point about retention, that's worth mentioning. The compensation is obviously a huge part of the retention. That's sort of the carrot of what somebody, if they stay, is entitled to enjoy for their compensation and benefits. There's also maybe more of a stick, you might say, which is it's not as pleasant a thing to consider, but I think it's extremely important, something that I recognized the importance of when I left my last firm, and that is to have a really locked, solid employment agreement with your lawyers. The agreement we had with my former firm was not well written to protect them from us leaving, to protect their assets, to protect their valuable cases, their relationships with referring attorneys and clients. And so just recognizing that it's a fact of life that you can hire somebody, invest in them, prop them up, give them opportunities and resources, and then they can decide someday maybe the grass is greener on the other side of the road and they want to leave and compete with you across the street. You really have to have a solid, bulletproof employment agreement with all of your lawyers. And ours is pretty stringent, but it's just that concept that good fences make better neighbors. Putting that in place creates the rules and the expectations very clearly for people from the outset, and it protects us against kind of the worst scenarios that one could anticipate of a lawyer trying to leave and steal clients from the firm or steal cases. I was very fortunate, and this is something I would encourage every lawyer to consider, but we've had Shane Inspector on my other podcast, and he's a partner and owner of one of the most successful plaintiffs firms in the country, Klein Inspector out of Philadelphia. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. He was kind enough to share with me their employment contract. I used that as a model for ours. We did tweak and change it to meet our own needs, but that's one element you want to have in place along with a solid compensation plan to deal with the issue of retention and create disincentives for people to leave under adverse conditions.
It was so important to us. Obviously we got a very strong draft to work from, made our tweaks, but it was so important. We took the extra step and we used a third-party employment lawyer and sent it to them and made sure, especially with it, coming from Pennsylvania and we're up here in Maine, that it made sense for our state and everything. And it was rock solid. So take the time. If there's some extra expense and you should send it to someone. If you're not an employment lawyer, get it in the hands of one and make sure that's perfected to cover yourself.
Yeah, and as an owner, you should not feel shy about having a strong employment contract. The people you're bringing in, you are handing off your most valuable assets, which are your cases, your clients, and your relationships with other lawyers. You're also mentoring them. You're making them better. In our case, we promote them. We pay for article placements so that they can have bylines under their names and photographs and publish articles. We pay for them to travel all over the country to go to CLEs. We pay for their membership in bar associations and groups. We encourage them to build a franchise, to develop their reputations and names, but all for the benefit ultimately of the institution. And if you were to invest all that in somebody and then they would take that and leave, I think it's only fair that the assets remain with your firm as much as a contract can protect you from that. You can't have somebody stealing your work product, your assets. And I should say there's nobody in our firm I worry about that with. And that's part of having a culture of getting the right people in the door, but you're just better to be safe than sorry on that front.
Need help on a complex personal injury or medical malpractice case? Gideon Asen accepts case referrals and regularly co-counsels with lawyers nationwide on high-value claims. The firm has recovered millions of dollars in cases that competitors turned away because they dig deeper. Ready to learn more? Email bgideon@gideonasenlaw.com to start the conversation. Gideon Asen shares fees as permitted by the laws of each state. Don't let complex cases overwhelm your practice. Elevate justice together with Gideon Asen.
So moving on to the compensation plan itself, I had mentioned that we kind of bungled this the first time. So just the background is when we started the firm, it was just my partner and I. We have an arrangement in our own partnership agreement about the distribution of our equity that only applies to the two of us. When we started to bring in non-partner, non-equity owners of the firm, we didn't have a plan for that initially. We weren't intentionally planning to hire people when we first started hiring people, but we had enough work. People came, wanted jobs. We found the right people. We started to build out. We negotiated salaries. There was no particular bonus plan. It was just the bonus was at the discretion of us, Taylor and I. And at the end of the year, we would meet, discuss the particular lawyer, and based on the success of our firm in the year and their contributions to it, we would bonus people. That's kind of how it worked. At some point, though, after having a couple of lawyers, non-owner lawyers in the firm, we started to come to the belief that that wasn't going to work longer term because these lawyers were working on cases that we were settling for, multi-7-figure, 8-figure amounts. They could see what that was producing for revenue to the firm. And they're very smart people. It wasn't going to be long before they realized that the, frankly, pittance we were paying them at the time in terms of just a flat salary was not really appropriate in light of their value added to the results we were obtaining. Where every time we were going to bonus somebody, there was no clear transparency or metric that one could look at to see if that was the right number, too high, too low. And we recognized that year in and year out, in every case, we are now going to be faced with developing what would appear to be somewhat arbitrary bonus numbers and creating the risk that no one was going to be happy no matter what we did. But also, if we made people happy in that arbitrary way, we were also not being fair to the firm because we would be overcompensating people relative to their real worth, which was just the truth of it. There's an intrinsic worth that somebody has. If you are paying them multiples of that, then you're not a good manager of your business. You're not being a smart owner or manager. So we faced that really big tension of, it was our goal to be generous. Our operating principle was to be a little more generous in every decision than we had to be. So always to err on the side of being extra generous, say 5 or 10% premium above what would be appropriate for bonus compensation. But we weren't doing 100% over, 200% over. And now our decision seemed arbitrary. It was backfiring on us. Our bonus plan was developing ill will. It was developing uncertainty because nobody knew what to expect. And we realized we had made a huge mistake, actually. And at the same time, it created an expectation that once you create, it's very hard to dial back, right? Somebody's making X and then you promise them, they're happy making X. You promise them 10X and then you give them 3X. And they're really unhappy about 3X. Where they were happy at X, they would have been happy at 2X if that's what you had promised them. But by promising them 10X, you can never dial it back to 2X and make them happy again. So this was where we were at that moment in time before you became involved, came to the firm and helped us develop our current compensation plan. So I'll stop there again for comments, and then we'll talk about the current iteration of the plan.
I think the big words that you hit, that I don't want to say resentment is a strong word, and that's not what it was, but the uncertainty that plan had, where nothing was definitive, people were guessing on what they were going to get. You know, everyone has a number in their mind, and if they weren't getting that number, that was a pure guess. It was creating some tension and uncertainty is the biggest thing. I think the plan that we've landed on, that we've had in place, actually it's been in place this year, 2026 is when we started it, is a very well thought out plan. It's very definitive. I mean, any attorney could go in there and, based upon, you know, knowing the production numbers of their team and our firm, land on almost an exact number of what they're going to get.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. So one of the governing principles of the new plan, unlike the old plan, was complete transparency, not just transparency for individuals, but across the board. So there's been a lot of social studies and data on the idea that workers are happier when there's complete transparency, even if they know their relative compensation relative to other people. It doesn't tend to engender the bad will because people are going to make assumptions about things that are probably worse than they are if you don't have complete transparency. I should say that it's probably not necessary to have transparency among different categories of employees. For instance, our attorney compensation plan is shared with all of the attorneys. The spreadsheet that shows what everybody is paid and how they reach that number is shared with all the attorneys. It is not shared with the non-attorney staff because it's apples and oranges. And I don't think there's a reason to do that. I don't think there's a benefit in doing that. But just focused on the attorney compensation now. So principle number 1 is complete transparency. Principle number 2 is predictability, so that the lawyer knows, based on their contributions to each year's revenues And that specifically is the fees generated by their team and their work and by the firm as a whole. They can plug those numbers in to our spreadsheet and determine exactly what they're going to make in that year. It is not subject to additional discretion. It is not subject to, arbitrary decision-making by owners or anybody else. Now, that doesn't mean that compensation structure does not itself have room to bonus people higher or lower based on criteria that we set. And I should back up and say that we are more than willing to share our plan, our spreadsheet, and all the details of it with anybody who wants it. Just like transparency in terms of our employees, there's nothing we try to hide about it. When we are recruiting for a job, we send it out to the lawyer who we're recruiting so that they can know in advance of coming what exactly the compensation plan here is and how it works. So let me describe kind of in general terms how it works. So our attorneys are all paid some base salary. That base salary is intended to be a amount of money that covers, it's not an insignificant base salary. I mean, it's a 6-figure number, but it is not intended to be the majority of the way they get compensated if our firm is doing well and they're doing well. It's kind of just a base amount that, especially for newer lawyers, before they've started to make their large bonuses, can cover basic living expenses and so forth. That base salary goes up incrementally and then caps at a number that's pretty modest. So the advantage to that as a firm is that we are not heavily exposed in terms of cash flow on lawyer salaries if our firm is not successful, if we are not generating revenue off of our casework. If there's a huge economic downturn, there's a cap on that cash flow need to pay lawyers that's pretty modest in terms of the economics of our firm as a whole. So that's principle one, modest base salary. That salary, I should say, is not a draw. It is an actual salary. They don't lose it later, but it is capped at a very, what would be a pretty low number overall for the economics. So that's point one. The second part of the compensation structure is what we call the team bonus. So our firm is segregated into different teams. We have 4 teams basically up for the lawyers. We have 3 different trial teams, which handle all of our litigated cases that go into suit, that are litigated and may go to trial. Each of those teams is comprised of 2 attorneys, a paralegal, and a legal assistant. Those teams each have cases that are being managed by those teams. And when those cases resolve, either by verdict or by settlement, and generate fees, that goes into that team's fee accrual number for the year. There is a threshold number that's frankly pretty high that we expect the teams to meet every year because we give them extremely good cases and a lot of resources and support. They should be able to generate a particular number. At that number or below, there is a certain team bonus number that each member of that team gets, which is a percentage of the fee revenue generated by that team. Once they hit milestones above that number, they get what we call performance boosts. I could be misremembering it. It doesn't matter exactly, but the threshold number, I believe, is $2 million or $2.5 million. That's what they're expected to generate. And they do get a percentage. I don't remember what it is. Each of the team members gets that percentage at that. Then after that, if it goes up to 2.5 million or 3 million or 5 million or 10 million, there are performance boosts, which give them a slightly higher percentage of those numbers, which creates very good positive incentives for the teams to perform beyond their baseline threshold numbers, because it's really an exponential. They not only get the percentage for that baseline, but they then get a higher percentage for the entirety of what they've generated. And if you start to do the numbers there, it starts to translate into quite a very large bonus number just on that team bonus. So that's the team. But one thing we recognized is we don't want to have a balkanized firm where each team is so competitive with another team that people are trying to cherry pick cases, or they're getting frustrated that maybe this particular case went to a different team, or they're not willing to help out with a deposition or work on a brief that may contribute to the success of another team. And so there's an enormous value on not only the team's success, but on everybody being vested in the success of the enterprise as a whole. So not only does everybody have a team bonus percentage of their compensation, but they also have a firm-wide bonus that's separate and apart from the team bonus. That firm-wide bonus is all of our lawyers collectively. There's 100 percentage points on the firm-wide bonus. Each year at their final annual reviews at the end of the year, we roll out to the lawyers what we propose that their respective percentage of the firm-wide bonus will be. And that's where I was saying these things can accommodate other criteria that are important to firm building as an enterprise. So their overall number of the firm-wide bonus depends on things such as seniority within the firm, leadership within the firm, if they take on roles that are outside of their casework, but are exhibiting leadership in other ways. Leadership outside the firm. Are they helping to generate business? Are they going around speaking at conferences? Are they building a reputation outside of the firm? Just overall, are they someone who's adhering to our core values? And then also just their performance. So we factor all of those things in. There's no lockstep thing where you've been here a certain number of years, you get X or Y, but that lawyer gets that percentage of the firm-wide bonus too. And then that firm-wide bonus also has different milestones where there are bumps. So there's a percentage. If the firm hits a number 10 million, there's a number, it bumps up a little bit. If we hit 15, there's another bump up. If we hit 20 million, there's another bump up. And all the way up to our 4-year revenue goal of 50 million, there's another bump up. So every individual lawyer's salary at the end of the year then is sum of their base salary, their team bonus, and their firm-wide bonus. There's one final group within our firm, which is not the trial team. We call it the IECU. People have heard about it. That's what we call it, the intake, evaluation, and core case unit. The lawyer who manages that, her team bonus is based on the production of the IECU as a unit, but she also participates in the team bonus. And that's really important because part of their job is to help screen cases, but they are handing off the best, most valuable cases to our trial teams. And so we certainly don't want to have a situation where our IECU lawyer feels like, I'm doing all this hard work, screening, evaluating, triaging cases. Now I'm handing off our really high value cases to another team, and I don't get to enjoy the benefits of that. But she does, because she's bonus off of that firm-wide bonus. So when you add all those things together, you plug them all into a spreadsheet, you put in all the numbers that each team is making in a year and the firm is making, and the numbers crunch in, and you can see, every lawyer can see what they would be earning in base salary and bonus for the year. And I can tell you that it is extremely generous compensation package if our firm is performing the way we expect the firm to perform. And so not only is it transparent, it's extremely generous. I think it is, if one were an equity partner at any other firm or any competitor firm, they would not likely be able to earn the same level of compensation they can at our firm, even without having equity. And frankly, there's not a huge distinction between having a bonus plan that gives you a right to a percentage of fee revenue and having equity anyway. So I think it accomplishes the goal of satisfying lawyers who are looking for appropriate, fair compensation, but in a context where they don't have technical equity, in an enterprise, which also is, there's a benefit to that too for them, because they don't have the downside risk. That's a real mouthful. I know we've kind of out of time now, but I wanted to get it all out there because people have specifically asked for those details. Again, if anybody wants to follow up with Jeff, send him an email. We're happy to send you the spreadsheet, the policy we have for attorney compensation, and feel free to edit and tweak that to your own needs.
100%. Yeah. That was great, Ben. To wrap it up, what we've developed is something that speaks to attorneys in multiple ways and allows us to have attorneys that are very driven toward their team bonus, but also very driven to do what's best on behalf of the firm and the other teams. And by structuring it that way, it feeds right back into the type of culture, that we want to develop here. So I love the bonus structure, and our attorneys, through their hard work, are really going to be the benefits of a generous structure.
Until next time.
Appreciate it, Ben.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Elevate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm. Share with colleagues if you found it valuable. Remember, building a successful law firm takes discipline, strategy, and determination. But you're not alone. Produced and powered by LawPods.